President, it is really an honor for me to be part of the continuation of the tradition of the United States Senate on George Washington's birthday to read Washington's farewell address. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, and took the oath of office as President of the United States on April the 30th, 1789. 7.5 years later, on September 19th, 1796, in his decision not to run for a third term as President of the United States, he delivered his farewell address. It's a particular honor for me as a senator from Maryland to participate in this tradition. Maryland, one of the original colonies that formed the United States. Annapolis, our state capital, where on December 23rd, 1783, George Washington resigned his military commission, establishing the principle of civilian government. We were the first chartered college in the United States, was in Maryland, in Chestertown, appropriately named Washington College. And I follow in this tradition with other Maryland senators, starting with Herbert O'Connor, John Butler, Daniel Brewster, J. Glenn Bell, Charles Mack Mathias. George Washington's farewell address. Friends and fellow citizens, the period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant, and they actually arrive when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust. It appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce to a more distinct expression of the public voice, that I should now apprise you of the resolution I have formed, to decline being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made. I beg you at the same time to do me justice, to be assured that this resolution has not been taken without strict regard to all considerations pertaining to this relation, which binds a dutiful citizen to his country, and that in withdrawing the tender of service which silence in my situation might imply, I am influenced by no diminution of zeal for your future interests, no deficiency of grateful respect for your past kindness, but I am supported by a full conviction that the step is compatible with both. The acceptance of and the continuations hitherto in the office in which you suffrage have twice called me have been a uniform sacrifice and inclination to the opinion of duty and the deference of what appears to be your desire. I constantly hoped that it would have been much earlier in my power, consistently with motives which I was not at liberty to disregard, to return to that retirement for which I have been reluctantly drawn. The strength of my inclination to do this, previous to the last election, and even led to the preparation of an address to declare it to you, but mature reflection on the perplexed and critical posture of our affairs with foreign nations, and the unanimous advice of persons entitled to my confidence, impelled me to abandon the idea. I rejoice that the state of your concerns, external as well as internal, no longer renders the pursuit of an inclination incompatible with the sentiment of duty or propriety. And I am persuaded, whatever partiality may be retained for my services, that in the present circumstances of our country, you will not disapprove my determination to retire. The impressions with which I first undertook this artist's trust was explained on the proper occasion. In the discharge of this trust, I will only say that I have, with good intentions, contributed towards the organization and administration of the government to the best excursions of which a very fallible judgment was capable. Not unconscious in the onset of the inferiority of my qualifications, experience in my own eyes, perhaps still more in the eyes of others, has strengthened the motives to defiance of myself. And every day the increasing weight of years admonishes me more and more that the shade of retirement is as necessary to me as it will be welcome. Satisfied that in any circumstances have given peculiar value to my service, they were temporary. I have the consolation to believe that while choice and prudence invite me to quit the political scene, patriotism does not forbid it. I'm looking forward to the moment, which is intended to terminate the career of my public life. My feelings do not permit me to suspend the deep acknowledgement of the debt of gratitude which I owe to my beloved country, and for the many honors it has conferred upon me, still more for the steadfast confidence with which it has supported me, and the opportunities I have thus enjoyed, and manifesting an inviolable attachment, my services faithful and persevering, though in usefulness unequal to my zeal. If benefits have resulted to our country from these services, let it always be remembered to your praise and as an instructive example in our annals, that under circumstances in which the passions agitated in every direction were liable to mislead, amidst appearances sometimes dubious, vicissitudes of fortune often discouraging, in situations in which not unfrequently one of success has countenanced the spirit of criticism, the constancy of your support was the essential prop of the efforts and guaranteed of plans by which they were effected. Profoundly penetrated with this idea, I shall carry it with me to my grave as a strong incitement to unceasing vows that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of the benefits that the union of brotherly affection may be perpetual, that the free Constitution, which is the work of your hands, may be sacredly maintained, that its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue, that, in fine, the happiness of the people of these states, under the auspices of liberty, may be made complete by so careful a preservation and so prudent a use of this blessing, as will acquire to them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection, and adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. Here, perhaps, I ought to stop, but a solicitude for your welfare, which cannot end but with my life, and the apprehension of danger natural to the solicitude urged me on an occasion like the present to offer you solemn contemplation and to recommend to your frequent review some sentiments which are the result of much reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, and which appear to me all important to the permanency of your felicity as a people. These will be offered to you with the more freedom as you can see in them the disinterested warnings of a parting friend who can possibly have no personal motive to bias his counsel, nor can I forget, as an encouragement to it, your indulgent reception of my sentiments on a former and not dissimilar occasion. Interwoven as the love of liberty and every ligament of your hearts, no recommendation of mine is necessary to fortify or confirm the attachment. The unity of government, which constitutes you one people, is also now dear to you. Is justly so, for it is a main pillar of the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety and your prosperity, of the very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that, from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed, to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth, as this is point in your political fortress, against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be the most constantly and actively, though often covertly and insidiously, directed. It is of an infinite moment that you should properly estimate immense value of your national unity to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourself to think and speak of it as the palliative of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discountenancing whatever may suggest even suspicion that it can be any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first drawing of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest. Sacred ties which now link together the various parts. For this you have every inducement of sympathy and interest. Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of America, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than the appellation-derived local discriminations. With slight shades of differences, you have manners, habits, and political principles. You have in a common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts, of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. But these considerations, however powerfully they address themselves to your sensibility, are greatly outweighed by those which apply more immediate to your interests. Here, every portion of your country finds the most commanding motives for carefully guarding and preserving the union of the whole. The North, in an unrestricted intercourse with the South, protected by equal laws of a common government, finds the production of the latter great additional resources of maritime and commercial enterprise and precious materials of manufacturing industry. The South, in the same intercourse, benefiting by the agency of the North, sees the agricultural growth and its commerce expanded. Turning partly into its own channel, the seamen of the North, it finds in particular navigation invigorated, while it contributes in different ways to nourish and increase the general mass of the nation's navigation. It looks forward of a maritime strength to which itself is unequally adapted. The East, in a like intercourse with the West, already finds in the progressive improvement of interior communications by land and water, will more and more find a valuable vent for commodities, which it brings from abroad or manufactures at home. The West derives from the East supplies requisite to its growth and comfort. And what is perhaps of still greater consequences, it must of necessity owe the secure enjoyment of indispensable outlets for its reductions to the weight, influence, and future maritime strength of the Atlantic side of the Union, directed by an indissoluble community of interest as one nation. Any other tenure by the West can hold this essential advantage, whether derived from its own separate strength or from the apostate of unnatural connections with any foreign power, must be intrinsically precarious. While then every part of the country thus feels an immediate and particular interest in union, all the parts combined cannot fail to find the united mass of means and efforts greater strength, greater resources, proportionally greater security from external danger, a less frequent interruption of their peace by foreign nations, and what is an inestimable value. They must derive from union an exemption from the broils and wars between themselves, which has so frequently afflicted neighboring countries not tried together by the same government, which their own rivalships alone would be sufficient to produce, but which opposite foreign alliances, attachments, and intrigues would stimulate and embitter. Hence, likewise, they will avoid the necessity of those overgrown military establishments, which under any form of government are auspicious to liberty, and which are to be guarded as particularly hostile to republican liberty. In this sense, it is that your union ought to be considered as a main prop of your liberty, and that the love of one ought to endure to you the preservation of the other. These considerations speak a persuasive language to ever-reflecting and virtuous mind, and exhibit the continuation of the Union as a primary object of patriotic desire. Is there a doubt whether a common government can embrace so large a sphere? Let experience solve it. To listen to mere speculation in such a case were criminal. We are authorized to hope that a proper organization of the whole, with the auxiliary agencies of government for the respective subdivisions, will form a happy issue to the experiment. It's well worth a fair and full experiment. With such powerful and obvious motives to union affecting all parts of our country, while experience shall not have demonstrated in practicability, there will always be reason to distrust the patriotism of those in any quarters may endeavor to weaken its bands. In contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as a matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished by characterizing parties by geographical discrimination northern and southern, Atlantic and western. Whence designing man may endeavor to cite a belief that there's a real difference of local interest and views. One of the expediencies of parties to acquire influence within a particular district is to misrepresent the opinions and aims of the other districts. You cannot shield yourself too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which springs from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. The inhabitants of our Western country have lately had a useful lesson on this head. They have seen in the negotiations by the executive and the unanimous ratification by the Senate the treaty with Spain, and in the universal satisfaction of that event throughout the United States, a decisive proof how unfounded were the suspicions propagated among them of a policy in the general government and the Atlantic states unfriendly to their interest in regards to the Mississippi. They have witnesses to the formation of two treaties, that with Great Britain and that with Spain, which secured to them everything they could desire in respect to our foreign relations towards confirming their prosperity. Will it not be their wisdom to rely for the preservation of these advantages on a union by which they were procured? While they not heretofore be deaf to these advisers, if such they are, who would sever them from their brethren and connect them with aliens? To the efficacy and permanency of your union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliances, however strict, between parts can be adequate substitute. They must inevitably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances in all times have experienced. Sensible to this momentous truth, you have improved upon your first essay by the adoption of a constitutional government, better calculated than your former for an intimate union and for the efficacious management of your common concerns. This government, the offspring of your own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted with full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles and the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within it a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim to your confidence and your support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures, are duties enjoyed by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political system is the right of people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations under wherever plausible character with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberations and action of the constituted authorities are destructive to this fundamental principle and of fatal tendency. They serve to organize factions, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of delegated will of the nation, the will of a party, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternative triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted, incongruous projects of factions, rather than an organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by a common council and modified by mutual interests. However, combinations or associations of the above description may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely, in the course of time and things, become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Towards the preservation of your government and the permanency of your present happy state, It was requisite not only that you steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretense. One method of assault may be to effect, in the forms of the Constitution, alterations which will impair the energy of the system, and thus undermine what cannot be directly overthrown. In all the changes to which you may be invited, remember that time and habit are at least as necessary to fix the true character of governments as of other human institutions, that experience is the surest standard for which to test the real tendency of an existing constitution of a country. The facility and changes upon the credit of mere hypotheses or opinions exposes to perpetual change from the endless varieties of hypotheses and opinions. And remember especially that for the efficient management of your common interest in a country so extensive as ours, a government of as much vigor as is consistent with the perfect security of liberty is indispensable. Liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed in justice, its surest guardian. It is indeed little else that a name where the government is too feeble to withstand the enterprises of factions to confine each member of society within the limits prescribed by the law, and to maintain all in the secure and tranquil enjoyment of the rights of persons and property. I've already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots in the strongest passions of human minds. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those of the popular form, it seems in its greatest rankness and truly their worst enemy. The alternative domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, is in itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the mind of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. And sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitor, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to the extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and the duty of wise people to discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the communities with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms and kindles animosities of one part against another, foments occasionally riots and insurrections. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which finds a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policies and will of another. There is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This, within certain limits, is probably true, and in governments of monarchical chaos, patriotism. But look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of party. But in those of the popular character in governments, purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendencies, it is certain that they will always be enough of that spirit for every salutary purpose. And there being constant danger of access, the efforts ought to be the force of public opinion to mitigate and assuage it. A fire not to be quenched, it demands a uniform vigilance to prevent it bursting into flames, lest instead warming it should consume. It's important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the power of one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all departments in one, and thus creates, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. A just estimate of that love of power and proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart, is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power by dividing and distributing into different depositories and constituting each the guardian of the public will against invasion by the other has been evinced by experiment, ancient and modern, some of them in our country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them. If, in the opinion of people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for through this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good. It is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Precedent must always greatly overbalance impermanent evil and a partial transcendent benefit, which the use can at times yield. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmness props of duties of men and citizen. The mere politician, equal with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be said, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation deserts the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Wherever may be seated in the influence of refined education on the minds of peculiar structures, reasons, and experience, but forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religion principles. It's substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government, who, that is a sincere friend to it, can look with indifference upon the attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. Promote then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. In proportion as the structure of government gives force to public opinion, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense of cultivating peace, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for dangerous frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repeal it. Avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but vigorously excursions in times of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidably wars may have occasioned, and not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. The execution of these maxims belong to your representatives, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. To facilitate them the performance of their duties, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts, there must be revenue. That to have revenue, there must be taxes. Then no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant. That the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of a proper object, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive moment for a candid construction of the conduct of government in making it, and for the spirit of acquiescence in the measures of obtaining revenues, which the public exigencies may at times dictate. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoy this conduct, and it can be that good policy does not equally enjoin it. It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and no magnanimous and too novel an example of people always guided by exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of times and things, the fruits of such plan would richly repay any temporary advantages which might be lost by steady adherence to it? Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, it is rendered impossible by its vices. The execution of such a plan is more essential than the permanent and inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. That in place of them, just and amicably feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another habitual hatred or habitual fondness is in some degree a slave, is a slave to the animosities or to its affections, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interests. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable and accidental or trifling occasions of despair occur. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinance, envenom, and blood contests. The nation, prompted by ill will, resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. In other times, it makes the animosity of a nation subservient to the projects of hostility instituted by pride, ambition, and other sinister or pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations have been the victim. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favored nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing in one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation into the quarrels and wars of the latter, without adequate inducement or justification. It leads to the concessions to the favored nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt of whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives ambitious, corrupted, and deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favored nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding with the appearance of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, and infatuation. As avenues to foreign influences in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence all the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be a satellite of the latter. Against the insidious wills of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. But the jealousies, to be useful, must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of the defense against it. Excessive partiality of one nation and excessive dislike of another causes those whom they actuate to seek danger only in one side, and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. The great rule of conduct for us in regards to foreign nations is to, in extending in commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Europe has set a primary interest which to us have none or very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concern. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties to the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collusions of her friends and enemies. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under the efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause neutrality. We may at that time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected, when belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisition upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us provocation, when we may choose peace or war, as our interests guided by justice shall counsel. Why forego the advantages of such a peculiar situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity to the toils of Europe, ambition, rivalry, interest, humor, or caprice? It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any particular portion of a foreign world, so far as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be misunderstood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. I hold the maximum, no less applicable to the public than private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. I repeat, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense. But in my opinion, it is unnecessary and unwise to extend them. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishments on a remarkable defensive posture, we may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest. But even our commercial policy should hold an impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favor or preference, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means the streams of commerce, but forcing nothing, establishing with power so disposed, in order to give to trade a suitable course, to define the rights of our merchants and to enable governments to support them, conventional rules of intercourse, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary and liable to be, from time to time, abandoned or varied, as experience and circumstances shall dictate, constantly keeping in view that it's folly in one nation to look for disinterested favor from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence from whatever it may accept under that character, that by such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having to give equivalents for nominal favors, and yet of being reproached with ingratitude for not giving more. There can be no greater error than expect or calculate with real favors from one nation to another. It is an illusion which experience must cure, which a just pride ought to discard. In offering to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I dare not hope they will make the strong and lasting impression. I could wish that they will control the usual current of the passion, or prevent our nation from running the course which has hitherto marked the destiny of nations. But if I may even flatter myself that they may be productive of some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. This hope will be full recompense of my solicitude for your welfare by which they have been dictated. How far in the discharge of my official duties I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated, the public record and other evidence of my conduct must witness to you and to the world. To myself, the assurance of my own conscience is that I've at least believed myself to be guided by them. In relation to the still subsiding war in Europe, my proclamation of the 22nd of April, 1793, is the index of my plan, sanctioned by your approving vote, and by that your representatives of both houses of Congress. The spirit of that measure has continually governed me, uninfluenced by any attempts to deter or defer me from it. Any deliberate examination, with the aid of the best lights I could obtain, I was well satisfied that our country, under all the circumstances of the case, had the right to take, and was bound in duty and interest to take, a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined as far as I should depend upon me to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. The considerations with respect to the right to hold this conduct is not necessary on this occasion to detail. I will only observe that, according to my understanding of the matter, that right, so far from being denied by any of the belligerent powers, has been virtually admitted by all. The duty of holding neutral conduct may be inferred, without anything more, from the obligations which justice and humanity impose on every nation. In cases in which it is free to act, to maintain inviolate the relations of peace and amity towards other nations. The inducements of interests for observing that conduct will best be referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time to our country, to settle and mature its recent institutions, and to progress without interruption to that degree of strength and consistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Though in reviewing the instances of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error. I'm nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with the upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. Relying on its kindness in this and other things, and actuated by the fervent love towards it, which is so natural to a man who views in it the native soil of himself and his progenitors for several generations, I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat, which I promise myself to realize without alloy, the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, that every favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. George Washington, United States, 19th of September, 1796.